As I begin, I'd like to thank Ken and Shirley Rendell, who suggested this talk, and my wife, Kathy Miranker, who did an enormous amount of research for the talk and also translated what I wrote into English. Magic, Meaning, and Discovery in Handwritten Materials. The title of this talk is taken from a 1979 lecture given by Philip Larkin, who you may know as a gifted poet and also a respected librarian. A great many scholars and bibliophiles have enlarged upon his ideas, but let me share some of his thoughts with you. Larkin observes that all literary manuscripts have two kinds of value, what might be called the magical value and the meaningful value. The magical value is the older and more universal. This is the paper the author wrote on. These are the words as he wrote them, emerging from the first time in this particular miraculous combination. We'll come back to Larkin, but let's pause for a moment and reflect on his observation. Emerging for the first time in this particular miraculous combination. As a Sherlockian collector, I've had many such first-time moments poring over holograph material. To see the adventures of Sherlock Holmes unfolding in the author's hand is to be magic back in time to beloved, familiar, though some might say imagination, places. And because it's impossible to read handwriting quickly, you slow down. A change comes over you. You're more receptive. The page becomes an intimate place, alive. The storyteller is talking directly to you. You don't have to be a gently mad Sherlockian for this to happen to you. Let's test this by taking a look at some iconic phrases, all from manuscripts on my shelves in Conan Doyle's neat script, and surrender ourselves for a moment to these miraculous combinations. Here's Holmes speaking to Watson from my favorite story, The Hound of the Baskervilles. You're luminous, but you're not a conductor of light. Some people without possessing genius have a remarkable power of stimulating it. Poor Watson. He's Holmes' best friend, indeed his only friend. I cringe every time I read that backhanded compliment. These words especially sting in Conan Doyle's hand, penned without any apparent reservations. Here's yet another oblique dig at Watson. In noting your fallacies, I was occasionally guided to the truth. Really, Holmes? Really? And we're still only on page 2 of the manuscript. And what about this phrase, also from the second page of The Hound? It captures so much of Holmes. Interesting, though elementary. Incidentally, the words elementary, my dear Watson, were never uttered by Holmes in any of Watson's accounts. The phrase owes its popularity not to Holmes, but to Basil Rathbone. How about this revelation from the third page of the manuscript of The Sign of Four, the second Sherlock Holmes tale? Holmes tells us, my mind rebels at stagnation. Give me problems, give me work, give me the most abstruse cryptogram or the most intricate analysis, and I am in my own proper atmosphere. I abhor the dull routine of existence. I crave for mental exaltation. Sounds laudable, but it's sobering when you realize that this is Holmes' apologia for his cocaine use. Or this bit of wisdom that Holmes shares with Watson, also from The Sign of Four. How often have I said to you that when you eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth? This maxim is so dear to Holmes, or perhaps Conan Doyle, that he repeats the thought just 2 pages later. Eliminate all other factors, and the one which remains must be the truth. I find the following words taken from the last paragraphs of the Sherlockian adventure, His Last Bow, especially chilling. They're spoken by Holmes on the eve of World War I. There's an east wind coming, Watson. I think not, Holmes. There's an east wind coming all the same. Such a wind has never blew on England yet. It will be cold and bitter, Watson, and a good many of us may wither before its blast. Indeed, Conan Doyle lost his son, and Great Britain would suffer 900,000 dead in World War I. At the time he wrote these sobering lines, September of 1917, Conan Doyle was working for the Ministry of Information. In fact, there's unverified wisdom that at the request of the ministry, the story suffered far more than the usual editing. Conan Doyle was asked to make the view of Germany more unsympathetic. Certainly, the 14 pages that remain of this manuscript are much cut up and marked up, are consistent with this supposition. It's not until one of the very last stories, The Three Garadebs, October 1924, that we get a glimpse of Holmes' true feelings about his friend, but only after Watson had been shot by Killer Evans. "You're not hurt, Watson. For God's sake, say you're not hurt." Quite the emotional contrast, isn't it, to Holmes' dismissive remarks about Watson's intelligence in the first excerpt we shared? And the words you'll see next from Watson testify to novelist Kingsley Amos's conviction that, quote, Holmes plus Watson is Doyle's chief legacy to the detective story. In response to Holmes's outburst, Watson writes, "It was worth a wound. It was worth many wounds to know the depth of loyalty and love which lay behind that cold mask. For the one and only time I caught a glimpse of a great heart as well as of a great brain." Here we're back to business in Holmes' more characteristic dismissive tone. "My dear Watson, try a little analysis yourself," he said with a touch of impatience. "You know my methods, apply them, and it will be instructive to compare results." Now let's return to Larkin's thoughts. He points out, "The meaningful value is of much more recent origin and is the degree to which a manuscript helps to enlarge our knowledge and understanding of a writer's life and work. A manuscript can show the cancellation, the substitutions, the shifting towards the ultimate form and final meaning. A notebook, simply by being a fixed sequence of pages, can supply evidence of chronology, unpublished work, unfinished work, even notes towards unwritten work, all contribute to our knowledge of a writer's intentions. His letters and diaries add to what we know of his life and the circumstances in which he wrote." Catherine Sutherland, professor at St. Anne's College, Oxford, expanded on these ideas in a presentation entitled "On a Letter of Jane Austen" during the author's semi-quincentennial. "There are things to discover and to treasure in manuscript beyond their words. Manuscripts are never used up." Continuing, Sutherland points out, "Where print makes meaning public, manuscript makes it intimate, a private compact between writer and materials that can live again in the receptive imagination. Yes, manuscripts matter." And now you know where we're going this evening. I'll be devoting my remarks first to the various kinds of magic we can experience from Sherlockian manuscript material, then to the biographic and bibliographic understanding, that which Larkin calls meaning, that can emerge from fossicking around in handwritten pages, and finally, to a new species of discovery capable of enlarging and transforming our understanding of the handwritten word. Besides story manuscripts, we'll uncover some magic and meaning in Conan Doyle's letters. In his 70 years, he wrote thousands to family, friends, and business correspondents. These afford a glimpse of his daily habits, his pleasures as a clubman, his dedication as a sportsman, his mixed feelings about Sherlock, and his often deprecating sense of humor. As we'll see later, they also testify to his growing business acumen. Consider this letter of July 1892. After discussing his historical novels, Conan Doyle includes this little biography. "Then there is a little group of detective books which arose at my irritation at the fact that the detective of fiction always appears to attain his result in a perfectly arbitrary fashion without any process of reasoning or thought. I only meant to write one little book, A Study in Scarlet, but the success of it made me do The Sign of Four, and then afterwards, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. What does this tell us? It's 1892, early enough in his career that it is necessary, and he is cheerful about writing back at length of his literary accomplishments. What's more, even at this early stage in the Holmes canon, at this time, not even a quarter of the adventures have been written. Conan Doyle is already dismissive of his creation. A great source of insight are the many notebooks Conan Doyle filled over his long career, entering personal events, social encounters, ideas, phrases, research for his numerous literary endeavors. Norwood Notebook Number 1 contains a wide-ranging collection of jottings plus hand-drawn calendars for the years 1883 to 1894. It's also interesting to note that Conan Doyle consistently used a distinct and different hand when writing in his notebooks as compared to his manuscripts and letters. No doubt because his notebooks were for his own use, whereas manuscripts and letters were to be read by others. Ask yourself what shockwaves reach you from the diary page for 1893, which contains its most infamous entry. Here you see "Killed Holmes" scrawled next to the month of December, when the detective seemingly perished in the adventure of the final problem. It's terse, it's messy, almost violent, it's personal. To me, these two words show Conan Doyle's visceral relief at being freed, or so he thought, from the encumbrance of Holmes. On the same page, it's touching to see the moment when his wife, Tui, is diagnosed with tuberculosis, and later their trip to Davos, where the air was thought to be salubrious for TB sufferers. After Conan Doyle contrived for his detective to plunge to his death at Reichenbach Falls, he explains his motivation to fellow members of the Authors Club in his dinner speech on June 1896. And then the chairman has alluded to another class of work which I have attempted, namely the Sherlock Holmes stories. I've been much blamed for doing that gentleman to death, but I hold that it was not murder, but justifiable homicide and self-defense, since if I had not killed him, he certainly would have killed me. Conan Doyle had long complained he was weary of Holmes, letters and conversation with friends, during his 1894 U.S. lecture tour, in newspaper interviews. But this version, in his address to his peers, is the best. And now some traces of magic that I found in The Sign of Four, Conan Doyle's second Sherlockian tale and fifth novel. The manuscript joined my collection in 2024. It's been in private hands since 1909, passing through a half a dozen owners before me. It's satisfying that the owner in 1909, Louis Haber, was a Grolier Club member and officer. It's never been available for scholarly review, thwarting one of the most crucial roles a manuscript can play, the opportunity to check the accuracy of the printed text. As my friend Otto Penzler of the Mysterious Press and Mysterious Bookshop points out, one of the confounding difficulties scholars have encountered in their studies of the Sign of Four is determining the accuracy of the text. That is, which of the earliest published versions most accurately represent the author's vision and execution. No matter how closely various editions have been examined, bibliographic scholars have been stymied by the absence of access to the original manuscript. The publication of a facsimile will forever resolve lingering uncertainties and become the one fixed point in any further discussion. My wife Kathy and I are at work on such a volume, to be published in 2027, a side-by-side facsimile and annotated transcription of the Sign of Four for scholarly scrutiny and, I hope, for general pleasure. Let us take a quick look at the manuscript. As we opened the pages, Kathy erupted from her chair in wonder when she reached page 27, and then again on page 52. I did much the same when I spotted what should have been a blank page facing page 123. This excitement was prompted as we noticed details in Conan Doyle's hand that had never been mentioned by any previous owner and had never been discussed by Sherlockian scholars. But before we delve into all this, it will help to remind ourselves of the story's plot. In The Sign of Four, our heroine, Mary Morstan, arrives at Baker Street and asks Sherlock Holmes to investigate the disappearance of her father and the source of a mysterious annual gift of a large, lustrous pearl. Holmes uncovers a tale of greed and betrayal surrounding a stolen Indian treasure, leading to a murder and a thrilling chase down the Thames. The treasure is ultimately lost, but Watson wins Mary's heart, finding love amid the intrigue. At the end of the story, Watson asks his friend, Jones, the Scotland Yard inspector, gets the credit, I get a wife, but Holmes, what is your reward? For me, there's the cocaine bottle. And what were the graphical surprises for Kathy and me? Most notable, I was electrified by a sketch, a figure peering into the empty Agra treasure chest. Why a drawing? Was Conan Doyle growing weary and needed a break from writing? Did he need to solidify the scene in his own mind? I wish I had a backstory to share, but alas, I can't even speculate. What I can say that this is one of only a handful of doodles found in Conan Doyle's hand in a Holmes manuscript. But who are we looking at? At this point in the story, the only characters present are John Watson and Mary Morstan, so we must be looking at them. The man peering inside the chest is clearly glad it's empty. And why would a lost treasure please Watson? Because if Mary is not to be rich, then he will not be seen as a fortune hunter and can, in good conscience, ask for her hand in marriage. Now let us look at another moment of excitement sparked by Kathy's two finds in the manuscript's gutters. Conan Doyle's usual practice, which we see in every extant manuscript of his Sherlock Holmes tales, was to begin each chapter with two lines centered on a new page. The word chapter, followed by a Roman numeral and a period, and the chapter title on the line below, followed by a period, except for two lapses in the sign of 4. The titling for chapters 4 and 6, which start on pages 27 and 52 respectively, does not begin atop those pages. Instead, the heading for each is penned in the gutter with an arrow drawn by Conan Doyle in ink, linking each title to its proper place. There's no knowing why this happened, but I read magic into the placement, or rather misplacement, of these headings. I like to think that Conan Doyle got carried away by the flow of his own words and momentarily forgot his own protocol. Now let's give some time to the Now let us give us some time to the meanings one can glean from Conan Doyle's hand. I'll draw examples from the Sign of 4 manuscript, as well as from handwritten correspondence about the sign, and from one very surprising book inscription. Incidentally, the items we'll see in a moment taken together reflect my collecting strategy, which is to assemble objects that tell a richer story as a group, that offer more insight together, that impart a more complete understanding than one object can do singly. One of the backstories to ring out loud and clear from the varied Sign of 4 holograph materials in my library is how active, persistent, and increasingly savvy a role young Conan Doyle took in promoting the novel to ensure its widest possible audience. The difference in Conan Doyle as a businessman in the 15 months between Sherlock Holmes' first and second appearances is striking. After his first Sherlockian novel was ignored or rejected by a good many publishers, the disheartened author felt compelled to make a bad bargain. For a mere £25, he gave up his copyright to secure the Study in Scarlet's appearance in a household magazine, Beaton's Christmas Annual. The Sign of 4 got its start very differently. In 1889, the American literary journal Lippincott's Monthly intended to expand and offer a UK version of the magazine. Editor James Stoddard made a trip to London to settle the necessary business arrangements in August of 1889. Also, he was prospecting for material on this visit. Stoddard invited two young authors out to dinner at the Langham Hotel. Conan Doyle, a rising writer by then with a popular novel Micah Clarke to his credit, and also Oscar Wilde. These gentlemen were commissioned on the spot to write novels for the periodical, an event memorialized in Conan Doyle's autobiography as, quote, a golden evening. In under 5 weeks, Conan Doyle wrote The Sign of Four. Months later, Wilde contributed The Picture of Dorian Gray. The Golden Evening evolved into both a literary partnership and friendship between Conan Doyle and Stoddart. This tale is told in part through 4 handwritten letters from Conan Doyle to Stoddart, which are bound into the Sign of Four manuscript. A friendship conducted by post? Absolutely. In these letters, punctuated in his business queries and suggestions, are wonderful personal asides. Conan Doyle shares with his new friend, by the way, it must amuse you to see the vast and accurate knowledge of London which I display. I worked it all out from a post office map. Or, a Philadelphian tobacconist actually wrote to me under cover to you to ask me where he could get a copy of the monograph in which Sherlock Holmes described the differences in the ashes of 140 different kinds of tobacco. Rather funny, isn't it? And last, our united kind regards to Mrs. Stoddart, whom I seem to know through seeing her photograph and hearing you speak of her. I trust the children are well. My baby waxes fat and kicks. The novel's title was a recurrent topic in these letters. We see Conan Doyle trying out some very different possibilities. The problem of the Sholtos, the sign of the 6, the sign of the 4, the sign of 4, the sign of 3, and more than soliciting Stoddart's opinion, he insists Stoddart make the choice. As far as I can see my way at present, any story will be called The Sign of 6 or The Problem of the Sholtos. You said you wanted a spicy title. I shall give Sherlock Holmes of A Study in Scarlet something else to unravel. In the October 1st letter, we see that the story title was still up in the air even after Conan Doyle had mailed off the manuscript. You promised to collaborate with me in the book, so I want you to name it, which will surely make you a bona fide collaborator. The Sign of Four strikes me as likely to be popular, but a trifle catchpenny. The Problem of the Sholtos is more choice, though less dramatic. On you be the burden of choosing. Over time, after its initial publication, the title was eventually shortened through publishing mishaps by common consent to The Sign of Four. It's not clear from these letters or from other surviving documents just which rights Lippincotts had secured on The Sign of Four. In the same October 1st letter, 3 months before the novel had even appeared in print, Conan Doyle was already pressing Lippincotts about newspaper serialization, determined to pursue every opportunity for an audience. I have given you some 1,000 words over your measure in order to improve and strengthen the story. I wish in return you would see your way to do something for me. When it's been out a couple of months, both in your English and American editions of Lippincott, surely it could not hurt you if I pass it through a single English paper. The pell-mell budget would, I know, be glad to use it, and it seems a little hard that I should not be able to use it after a time which would ensure it from clashing in any way with your journal. I cannot see how a single copy less of Lippincott would sell in consequence. Of course, a bargain is a bargain, but still, if it can make no possible difference to you and it does to me, I hope you will relax it to some small extent. And next, we see further evidence of Conan Doyle trying to make some money. He goes on to suggest, I wish, therefore, that your firm would reprint A Study in America and give me some dollars for it. This is a curious request, as neither he nor Lippincott owned the copyright. While the tone of this letter is deferential, perhaps pleading, Conan Doyle was quite serious about exploiting every conceivable opportunity for boosting sales for both his Sherlockian tales. In late 1889, Conan Doyle would sign on with a literary agent, A.P. Watt, but before this partnership, he undertook directly much of the work of getting the Sign of Four serialized in UK newspapers and magazines. Here you see two overtures in quick succession to Robert Hemingsley of the Birmingham Daily Gazette. In a postcard dated March 10, 1890, he writes, "I am going to pass the Sign of Four through as many provincial newspapers as possible." Again, he writes lightly, but there is more than a touch of pleading or perhaps salesmanship when Conan Doyle says, "It makes a good serial, for it is full of incident. 10 guineas. 4 days later, Conan Doyle writes Hemingsley and points out, "Lippincott is so little read as yet that the story is fresh to the public." He sounds rueful, yet still wearing his salesman's hat, but in the next few sentences, he's all business again. It's helpful to remember that at this point, Conan Doyle was church mouse poor. It may sound like he was obsessing, but hindsight confirms that it was not without reason. Serialization would indeed have been a welcome source of income. The Lippincott's appearance netted him £100, it's about £15,000 today, and subsequent book edition of The Sign of Four sold fewer than 1,000 copies in the first year. In fact, the press run didn't sell out, and the remaining sheets were passed from publisher to publisher, Spencer Blackett to Griffin Ferran, and then to George Nunes, before they were exhausted. A bibliographer's delight. Looking ahead to the book edition of The Sign of Four planned by Lippincotts, Conan Doyle also alerted Stoddart to some errors of fact in the manuscript. By the way, there's one very obvious mistake which must be corrected in the book form. In the second chapter, the letter is headed July 7th, and on almost the same page, I talk of it being a September evening. Again, in the first chapter, the same post office is called Wigmore Street and then Seymour Street. The first is correct. As Conan Doyle wrote more and more Sherlockian tales, he became more and more cavalier about errors of fact and the inconsistencies in the stories. After all, to him, they were mere bagatelles. He later tells us, "In short stories, it has always seemed to me that as long as you produce your dramatic effect, accuracy of detail matters little," explaining to readers of The Strand. "What matters if I can hold my readers? I've taken liberties in some of the Sherlock Holmes stories. That does not trouble me in the least when the story is admittedly a fantasy." Returning to 1894, 4 years after the publication of The Sign of Four, I have a book with some handwriting that goes beyond printed text to tell a revelatory tale about U.S. publishing practices and about Conan Doyle's temperament. This is an American pirated edition of The Sign of Four with the name of the publisher Lovell and Coriel stamped on the spine. A different imprint, the United States Book Company, is stamped on the title page. Both companies were pirate publishers, printing uncopyrighted works, and many copyrighted books too, without permission from or remuneration for the authors. James Lovell, known among his peers as Bookaday Lovell, was the most prolific of U.S. pirate publishers. Indeed, according to Tebble, in 1895, Lovell's imprints accounted for 70% of the hardbound books published in the United States. In 1890, fed up with negligible profits, Lovell raised $5 million, that's $180 million today, bought up nearly a dozen competitors, and created a new imprint, the United States Book Company. So hasty was Lovell to release titles under this new imprint that occasionally the existing imprint on a book's spine or title page was not updated. The Sign of Four was the most pirated of Conan Doyle's stories. I have been unable to track down how many copies may have been sold by these bandits, but in my pirates library, which occupies a separate room holding thousands of volumes, there are more than 34 different U.S. pirate publisher imprints. And of course, many of them published multiple editions, octavos, quartos, in-wrappers, hardbound, deluxe bindings, and the like. Not surprisingly, it was a practice that enraged Conan Doyle, and he was vocal about it. Yet here we see a U.S. Book Company edition inscribed by the author. Conan Doyle's thoughts about pirated editions are clear. It's rough on me, but I have no legal redress. Remember, the United States had not signed the International Copyright Agreement until 1911. No doubt he inscribed this copy because Chicago business magnate Harlow N. Higginbotham proffered the book at a dinner party in the author's honor that he had hosted at his home. It was simply polite for Conan Doyle to sign the volume. A trifle that further teases out the backstory from these varied artifacts is an admission ticket to the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition tucked into the book. The book's owner, Higginbotham, served as the event's president, and the ticket bears his printed signature, useful in authenticating the book's ownership. Now I'd like to take you deeper into the Sign of Four manuscript, following a more contemporary avenue of bibliographic and scholarly inquiry, examining mess, the messy materiality of a manuscript as a lens for uncovering and interrogating meaning. Quoting Sutherland again, this time from her book, Why Modern Manuscripts Matter. Deletions and substitutions not only express the interior workings of composition, they have the power to infiltrate and enrich our understanding of the works we read. They offer the writer's imagination for inspection to the reader's imagination. Mess contributes to meaning and value. Mess is worthy of attention. Keeping these words in mind, let's examine Conan Doyle's manuscript material on the lookout for mess. Quite a challenge, as it turns out. Conan Doyle wrote his Sherlock Holmes stories once and only once. There's no rough draft, very few revisions, no fair copies. I know of only one Sherlock Holmes story, The Valley of Fear, for which he made notes. No one has ever discovered any Holmes story ideas in diaries or commonplace books. They're simply the manuscript. Each story emerges on the page fully informed, with no visible clue to the compositional workings of his mind, rather little evidence of any doubt or debate over word choice. A Conan Doyle manuscript has very little mess, just as steady, legible penmanship, line after line after line. This should not be a surprise, as Conan Doyle's wife tells us. My husband, Lady Jean recalled, trained himself to write when the flow of inspiration came anywhere and in any circumstance. He had that rare faculty of being able to entirely isolate his mind, as it were, from his surroundings. He had no settled hours for work. Sometimes he'd be in the study before the servants were up, or he would go in and write after a game of golf. He would never force the work. He only wrote when the inspiration was upon him and when it just flowed from his pen, so he could hardly set it down quickly enough. He sometimes wrote his Sherlock Holmes stories in a room full of people talking. He would write in a train with the hum of conversation around him, or in a cricket pavilion during the match while waiting for the rain to stop. Conan Doyle's manuscripts reveal him to be a systematic, conscientious writer. He set and stuck to certain writerly habits in his notebooks, calendars, correspondence, and literary manuscripts. When Conan Doyle made changes, he made them both in ink and pencil, something that can be seen in all his Sherlock Holmes stories. His method was to use ink to make changes while writing and pencil for changes made on rereading. Note how minimal his changes are to this page of the Sign of Four. Now let's take a look at the manuscript of The Adventure of Priory School, written 14 years after the Sign of Four. It's one of the messier manuscripts. As you can see, the passage of time has done little to change Conan Doyle's steady, legible hand in the Priory School. And that's also true of my other Sherlockian manuscripts. While these manuscripts have nothing like the mess we find in Dickens' Christmas Carol or James Joyce's Ulysses, it does have some mess. And as such, it gives us a glimpse of the 30-year-old Conan Doyle when he was still developing as a writer and grappling with his material as he was writing it. One kind of change Conan Doyle did make with some frequency was to rename characters. One example occurs in The Adventure of the Solitary Cyclist, December 1903. Here we see that the surname for the monstrous Jack Woodley was originally Murphy. Note the cross-eyed is a neat, thin line, with the original name still visible and legible beneath it. Neat, simple edits. And certainly, Roaring Jack Woodley is a better name for a villain than Roaring Murphy. In contrast, let's consider our heroine's last name in the sign of 4. When we meet Mary on page 12, her name has been redacted twice. The initial name is completely illegible. The second, while messy, appears on close scrutiny to be more stang. Finally, next to more stang, Conan Doyle neatly inserts more stan. Curiously, it takes Conan Doyle quite some time to write the new name correctly, both for Mary and her father, Colonel Morstan. As a gently mad Sherlockian, I naturally made a census of the name, revealing that her surname first appears as more stang 39 times between pages 12 and 93, with a neatly inked line striking out the final letter, before the name was properly fixed in Conan Doyle's mind. On page 23, we find alterations that make it clear that Conan Doyle was still inventing his cast of characters, not just their names. From the manuscript, we can see that the conspirators who stole the great Agra treasure were originally threesome, and that the symbol used to identify them was originally a sign of 4. Requisite plot changes, of course, were necessary. In the story, Holmes is examining a paper that Mary Morstan had found in her father's pocketbook on his death. Holmes remarks, "In the left-hand corner is a curious hieroglyphic, like 4 crosses in a line with their arms touching. Beside it is written in very small, rough, and coarse characters, the sign of the 4. Jonathan Small, Mahatma Singh, Abdullah Khan, and Dost Akbar." The manuscript reveals that 2 crosses have been changed to 3 and then 4, that the description, small and neat, has been changed to rough and coarse, that the phrase, the sign of 3, has been changed to the sign of 4, and the name Dost Akbar has been added after Abdullah Khan. From this point, the story proceeds without further significant textual hiccups. Now I'd like to take a closer look at the sign of 4 manuscript at its messiest. Let us return to Mary Morstan's first appearance. Our heroine is making her way up to Holmes and Watson's rooms at 221B Baker Street and introducing herself and her dilemma. The substitution we see is quite unlike the neat strike-throughs you're now familiar with. Recall, with the name change in the Adventure of the Solitary Cyclist manuscript, a thin cross-out. The original name is still visible and legible beneath it. This is typical of Conan Doyle. The sign of 4, notably, is the earliest manuscript in which a change to a character's name occurs and in which the original name appears thoroughly obliterated. It's crossed out twice, once with hash marks and once with curlicues. I'm stunned that Conan Doyle's nib didn't bite through the paper. What was Mary's original name? Large parts of the plot hinge on her surname. To the unaided eye, there are few tantalizing clues. An uppercase S appearing above the black ink, perhaps an O at the end. Could Conan Doyle have originally written Sholto? Thankfully, we live in an age in which there are non-invasive technologies which we can use not only to interrogate obscure handwritten words, but also to reveal what lies beneath redactions. Through the offices of our rare books colleague, Laura Perrings, I was introduced to the Yale Institute for the Preservation of Cultural Heritage, or ICPH. There, advanced imaging and material analysis are used to examine, identify, and conserve cultural artifacts. I emailed images of 2 manuscript pages to conservation scientist Dr. Richard Hark, who also teaches scientific analysis of the book at the Rare Book School at UVA. He interrupted his vacation to exclaim over the image of the obscured text. It was truly thrilling to see Arthur Conan Doyle's beautiful handwriting describing the first reference to Mary Morstan, the future Mrs. John Watson. I can almost make out some of the covered text. Very intriguing. Last September, I visited Yale, where Dr. Hart and Dr. Aniko Bezur began 2 days of forensic examination. Hark is the lab's senior conservation scientist, and Bezur is the Wallace S. Wilson Director of Scientific Research at the IPCH. The investigation used X-ray fluorescence as well as examination with infrared, ultraviolet, and visible raking light using a glancing multispectral microscope. Scanning X-ray fluorescence is a non-destructive analytic technique used to determine the elemental composition of a material. It works by bombarding a sample with high-energy X-rays. This causes some atoms in the sample to emit light. The emitted light has a unique color signature for each element, allowing them to be identified and quantified. This was a sobering warning sign in the lab. Clearly not a place for the faint of heart. As Dr. Hark explains, XRF detects elements rather than specific compounds. It does not directly identify pigments, inks, or other materials. But conservation scientists use the elemental information to infer which materials are likely present based on historical use and known pigment or ink compositions. This makes scanning XRF an important tool for revealing hidden layers, understanding artistic techniques, monitoring deterioration, and supporting conservation treatment efforts while keeping objects completely intact. The first step was to probe an ink-free area and then an area with ink, establishing the composition of the paper and the ink. It was immediately obvious that no titanium was present either in the paper or the ink, a relief, since titanium was only added to paper and ink in the 20th century as a brightener. The presence of a high concentration of iron in the ink confirmed that Conan Doyle wrote using iron gall ink, still in common use in the 19th century. It was possible that Conan Doyle could have used India or China ink, but these have no iron in their formulations. There was also a high concentration of calcium in Conan Doyle's ink. Calcium is not called for in any iron gall recipes we could uncover, and its presence is a mystery. Perhaps calcium carbonate was added to his brand of ink to make it less destructive of paper. To me, these findings are as electrifying as any of Sherlock's discoveries and deductions. It was beyond marvelous for me to see these kinds of forensics used to eliminate bibliographic questions. In our investigations, the most revelatory image was from the front side X-ray fluorescence probe. Here, Dr. Hart places the manuscript in the instrument. The detailed scan of the obscured area provides a better view of the crossed-out portion. The most revealing result is shown in the modified iron map. Mary's original surname appears to be Magshaw. If this is correct, then her name could be a variant of the Scottish MacShaw, that is, son of Shaw. Shaw is a Scottish-Irish Gaelic name meaning wolf or peaceful. The name is not uncommon in the Highlands and in Northern Ireland as McShane. On page 13, the second time Conan Doyle writes Mary's name, you can see in the iron map and especially in the calcium map that the mag has been dropped. Here, originally, she is simply Miss Shaw. The name Shaw is changed to more Stang before eventually becoming more Stan by crossing out the terminal G. As I'm over my time, I'll skip over the results yielded by multiband imaging. As with all discoveries, this one provokes new questions. How did Conan Doyle conjure Mary's original surname? Why did he reject it? Why did he conceal the change so thoroughly? Why force more Stang? Why more Stan? For Sherlockians, these as yet unsolved mysteries simply mean the game is afoot. For this audience of bibliophiles, I hope the path we took this evening both rekindles your pleasure in the magic of the handwritten word, the information it reveals, and emboldens you to pursue by any and all means making discoveries inherent in holograph material. Done.